I think you should know about the scariest man in America. Welcome to spooky season. You know, it's truly spooky season when we have a new Speaker of the House.
And this happened sort of suddenly. But we're going to celebrate soon. She spent the last couple of weeks on her knees in prayer to the Lord.
Who in the world is Mike Johnson? I think we should ask another question. Who is the scariest man in America, if it's not the man that absolutely shaped our new Speaker of the House? Welcome to my channel. I'm Liz, and I grew up in a Christian cult. So I think I know a thing or two about being spooked. I didn't grow up scared of fire and brimstone or the devil, because I was one of the chosen. I believed I was absolutely right about my Christian beliefs, and because I was right, everyone in America should follow them as well. So when I hear the new Speaker of the House talking about his ideas and how he uses the Bible to absolutely determine what kind of political beliefs he has, I see 16-year-old me in him. In him? Is that the correct phrase? You know what I'm saying? I'm saying that I see what I believed at 16 years old absolutely represented as Speaker of the House. If I was Speaker of the House at 16, you would be terrified. But I think to really understand Mike Johnson, we should understand who trained him. And it's a man you probably have never heard of before, but he might be the scariest man in America. Anyway, you're watching That Liz Hunter. I'm going to talk about the scariest man in America. Happy Halloween, folks. Welcome to my channel.
News contributor David Barton is very familiar with the new Speaker. We spoke to him recently, right after Mike Johnson was elected on the House floor.
Yeah, we know Mike very well. We've been friends for years. Mike is the guy that has been a leader and a fighter in really the conservative, Christian, pro-life, pro-marriage movement.
We actually don't really need to ask what kind of influence David Barton has had on Mike Johnson, because in 2021 he actually spoke on the Wall Builders podcast. Wall Builders is the organization that David Barton founded.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's Wall Builders Live. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to actually take you out to the Pro-Family Legislators Conference today. Congressman Mike Johnson, our special guest, and we want to get to it right away, so we're diving straight in. This is Mike Johnson at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference.
I just want to say at the outset, I am so grateful to Wall Builders and David and Rick and everybody involved. And I was introduced to David and his ministry a quarter century ago, and it has had such a profound influence on me and my work and my life and everything I do. So I'm just so grateful you guys continue to sow into this work and help equip the soldiers on the front line.
So how do we get to know David Barton? I think one of the best ways we can get to know David Barton is by watching this Jon Stewart interview with him in 2012. I'm going to go through and I'm going to break down a lot of the problems I see with David Barton that are very highlighted throughout this interview. And also, it's a great way for you to get to know him without me reading his Wikipedia page and boring you.
My guest tonight, an American historian and the founder and president of Wall Builders. Please welcome to the program, David Barton. Sir, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, bro.
So here's what happened. So we have Mike Huckabee on the show.
Right? Good guy.
Very nice guy, good friend of the show. We always have really interesting conversations. So I'm watching him praise you. He was at a conference and he said,
Right.
David Barton is the greatest historian in America, and all children should have to learn from him in their curriculum. I'm paraphrasing.
So he's really paraphrasing Mike Huckabee, because if he said what Mike Huckabee said, which we would all be a lot more nervous, but Mike Huckabee said that everyone in America should be required to learn from David Barton at gunpoint.
Right.
And I thought to myself, well, geez, I'd like to meet the greatest historian in America, who all children have to learn from. And then I started looking up your stuff, and I thought, well, okay,
Oh, that's a dangerous thing to
now
do.
this seems odd.
Yeah.
This seems odd.
Yeah.
And so I asked Mike Huckabee about some of the things that you'd been saying, and he said, why don't you ask David Barton himself? And I said, okay.
And here I am.
And so here you are. So let me ask you, just for our audience that is not familiar with what you do, how would you describe what it is you do?
I'd say historical reclamation.
David Barton is not a historian. He is the founder and president of Wall Builders. As he says, he is in the business of historical reclamation. He went to Oral Roberts University in 1972. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Education. So he learned how to be a teacher, but he did not learn how to properly study history. And as he said, as he says, he uses historical documents that he picks and chooses from to teach what he teaches, and he was never educated in the actual study of history, and that is quite evident as if outside of this interview at what he teaches about history, because he learned how to teach about religion, not about history.
We in our company have about 100,000 documents from before 1812. So documents out of Black history, out of religious history, out of Constitution, you name it. We've got 100,000 originals. So that's what we take a lot of history back to, is those original things that happened.
But it always seems that the history that you take comes back to the idea that we are a more Christian nation than we are living.
I'd say it's not accurate. Now, there's people who point that out, but I'll give you a good example. I was appointed in Texas as one of the experts to help do the history and government standards there, which means...
Now, so you are a curriculum authority?
For about 20 years, California, Texas, all these states, I do their history and social studies standards.
My question is, what qualifications does someone with a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Education have in setting history standards that are used to teach millions of children in public schools American history? What qualifications does David Barton have? As he said, all he's done is look at original documents and decide that history education was inadequate, when he himself never studied American history at a collegiate level in any way.
And so I'm asked by the state, by the governor, or by the State Board of Education to do that. So,
but you are, and this may be a misconception, but you are not a historian, like in terms of academic historian. You don't have a doctorate in that.
Don't have a doctorate in that. No, I've got all the documents, and that's what's been a lot of fun, is because I went through history in school, and what I got taught and what I see in the actual documents aren't the same thing. That's what got me started. I came to some really old documents, and they contradicted what my school book said. And so what we do now is we say, all right, publishers, here's what the actual documents are. Print the documents. Go back to the originals. So in the issue of religion, being one of the guys appointed in Texas, all my reviews are online. And so there's 43,000 words online in my reviews of the last set of standards.
Right.
Only 2 subjects do I ever mention Christianity, 2 issues. One was the teachers recommended taking the study of Christmas out as a holiday.
What David Barton is really good at is taking words from historical documents and backing up his own personal beliefs about the American founders and what America is supposed to be. And then he points out stories that make no sense, talking about Christmas and education, and he never goes... as you're watching this interview, you notice Jon Stewart will bring up points like, oh, you believe that America is a Christian nation, but he never answers that question. He says, well, I just believe what the original documents believe. And because he can pick and choose whatever he wants to say from the original documents, he's read them, and most of us haven't spent 40 years reading over 200,000 original documents. Most of us would not have the knowledge to know what the original documents say. We just have to take this man's word for it. And he can pick and choose different sentences from the original documents to back up his own thesis without any context. And he uses a 21st century mindset to look at these original documents, whereas the Founding Fathers, evangelicalism did not really exist at the time of the founding of the United States. Evangelicalism didn't really exist in the current iteration of religion that we have today. Baptists didn't really exist at the time. Methodism, those denominations didn't really exist. Most people were Anglican or Catholic, and you had some Protestants in New England who were different from Anglicans, but they were very Episcopalian and Anglican. And as he's reading these Founding Fathers, he has a very charismatic Christianity viewpoint, because his parents started a charismatic church in Texas where he grew up, and he is from the charismatic Christian movement, and he's looking at these documents from a charismatic Christian movement perspective. Charismatic Christians did not exist in the 18th century, and he's putting his beliefs on the Founding Fathers and then claiming that they are Christian, because he's putting his own... When he uses these same words that the Founding Fathers are using, he has a different meaning. But he's not explaining that. He's just saying, oh, the Founding Fathers said the word creator, and therefore they believed in God as, created the earth in literally 7 days, because they used the word creator, because in 1980, when he's reading this document, he believes that the earth is created in 7 days, and when he says creator, that's what he believes. Because they use the same words, he inserts his 20th century perspective and language on the Founding Fathers.
So you're saying that you are not interested in this idea?
No, I am. But
Oh, okay,
as an emphasis, that's no.
That is your almost total emphasis.
No, it's not.
Oh.
Now, see, a good example is, I know the kind of people that go after me. And when I was on Texas board, there's a group that did a press release, and all of a sudden, MSNBC and the Times, all these goes, Barton's cramming Christianity down their throats in Texas. No, there's 43,000 words. There's 2 references to Christianity in 43,000 words. That's not a super big emphasis. Now, not that that's not important to me,
Right.
but what I teach...
Well, I would say, in Leviticus, being gay is mentioned twice, but people on the right kind of make a big emphasis out of that.
That's not a history issue. That's not a history issue.
So something interesting is he says in his 43,000 words, Christianity is mentioned twice. That means he's not emphasizing Christianity in his history education, and yet when the Founding Fathers barely mention Christianity, he says that they were Christians. I'm just pointing that out. His whole thesis is that the Founding Fathers were not deists, that they were evangelical Christians, and yet when Jon Stewart tries to bring that up, he says, that's not my point, and he never explains what he believes was missing in his historical education that Wall Builders and his organization is now teaching today and has spent the last 2 decades teaching.
Well, no, but I'm just saying that I don't know that...
Let me give you another way of looking at it.
Please.
And having done history standards before, publishers come to me and say, all right, you have to write the standards, help us do the textbooks. And I understand what my name evokes, so I told the publisher, okay, I'll be the editor, but just don't put my name in the textbook. Just leave it off. That textbook that I edited is now the best-selling public school textbook in America. So historians across the board think it's a great book. They just don't know that I did it.
Well, not historians, but
Teachers.
When Texas makes a curriculum book, it goes out. I don't think it's a free market thing. I think it just goes out to
schools.
schools.
It was a free market thing because I worked with the publishers, not the standards in Texas. So I went to the publisher, or the publisher went to me.
Right.
And
well,
so,
if more people are buying it, then it's clearly better.
And say that's what they're doing. Well, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I think the makers of crack might have something to say about that.
What's interesting to me is David Barton says, all these historians praise my textbook, but they don't know that David Barton's edited it. And he thinks that's a good thing. And millions of kids are learning from these textbooks, and a non-historian is the one who helped edit it and choose what content goes in it. I just think that's an interesting aside. Let's go to part 2 of this interview.
You are an important figure. You go in and you argue in front of the Supreme Court. You go in and you work with our Congress. You work with Congress people. You go in and you write curriculum. And I can't help but think that and in your writings you talk about reclaiming our forgotten history.
Right.
When it seems to me, someone who probably has a very different perspective on this nation's history, that you are rewriting more than reclaiming.
Let me give you a shot. Let me give you a shot at that. One of the things I'm really proud about that we got done in Texas is we took the number of minorities who are covered in the standards from 9% to 25%.
Right.
The way I did it said, hey, we're not covering any of the Jewish founding fathers. We're also not covering the black founding fathers, those elected to office, those who were military heroes.
Right.
We're also not covering the women of the Revolution. We're also not covering Hispanics in the Revolution.
Okay. Barton is accused of rewriting history to match his perspective on the Founding Fathers. Instead of addressing that, he says, well, we increased coverage of minority representation in history, which is a good thing, and I'm happy that has been done. But he doesn't answer the accusation of the fact that he rewrites the Founding Fathers and makes them out to be more Christian and religious than they actually were. He completely ignores Jon Stewart's criticism over there and swivels to his discussion of minority representation in his history. It's really hard to say, hey, you're rewriting history. Someone say, hey, I'm actually writing about minorities, and not make the person saying, hey, you're rewriting it look like the bad guy, because then you're critiquing the fact that he's writing about minorities in his historical representation. Does that not that makes it very difficult to debate him, because he changed the subject. And it's frustrating to me because Jon Stewart rarely in this interview goes back to his original question, because David Barton so skillfully changes the subject. Let's keep watching.
That's forgotten history. I'll bet you most Jewish people can't name the Jewish founding fathers. Most black people can't name the black founding fathers.
No, I can. Sandy Koufax.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're right. Sandy Koufax. That's all I got.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to include 2 voice notes I sent a friend as I was writing this video, because my friend was like, wow, you should just say what you said in these voice notes to me. And while I was rewatching what I am talking about in these voice notes, I liked what I said in the voice notes better because I wasn't scripted. I was just like going off the rails about David Barton, and I think it describes it much better than I did when I recorded this video. So here is the voice note about this moment in the video. There's at one point in the interview where Jon Stewart is like, well, do the textbooks that you encourage, do they teach that America is a religious theocracy or was founded to be a religious theocracy? And Barton says, well, wait, my textbooks are actually quite diverse. We increased standards from 2% of our textbooks in Texas covered minorities, and by the time I was done with them, 25%. So we covered the Jewish founding fathers, the Black founding fathers, the Hispanic founding fathers, and we really value in teaching all parts of history. And Jon Stewart never follows up with the original question. He's like, yeah, I guess I can't name a Jewish founding father, and they laugh it off. David Barton says, like other people, David Barton says, most Jews can't name a Jewish founding father. Most Black people can't name a Black founding father. And that's the, when Stewart, says, do your textbooks teach that the separation of church and state is a myth? That is literally David Barton's answer. And Jon Stewart never follows up. Because I think he was a little bit, I'm watching this interview, and I think he thought he could just talk to David Barton and make fun of him. And Barton is so skillful at weaving and resetting the goalpost midway through the conversation that you don't remember your original question to him, and that's why he's so good at it.
So would you say, so I'm incorrect in saying that you would, because I've seen tapes of you speaking where you make policy recommendations based on the Bible, things like,
right.
I would like to see the capital gains tax and the estate tax gone because the Bible says so.
That's right, but those are also speeches given to groups of ministers, and I'm speaking to ministers. That's not a textbook sitting. That's a whole different sitting. What I'll see, for example.
So you're saying there is a wall of separation?
Well, there is, and that is. But see, you got to understand where that came from too.
Right.
There's no problem.
No, a wall of separation within you of church and state.
No. Any more than the founders wanted it. Now, what they want is separation of the institutions, never separation of the influence. I mean, they never at any point said, "Hey, God."
Now we're sort of where the rubber meets the road here.
Okay.
Because that is kind of what I'm getting to. Is as much as you might protest that your main thrust is not to get us back to this idea that the founders didn't want religion separated from the state. The documents that you pull, going off the Constitution, it doesn't mention the Creator. It doesn't mention Jesus. It doesn't mention praying in any way. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't they be explicit in the mention of religion if they had wanted it so? Because they were not coy people for the most part.
They were not coy, and they were very blunt. And because they were, when you read the Federalist Papers, they said religion belongs to the states. Now, you read the state constitutions, they're extremely graphic on religion. But there are 7 references in the Constitution to religion, whether it be Article 7. And by the way, the declarations incorporated into the Constitution, Article 7. So that's 4 references to God just in Article 7.
But references to God are very different than explicit. They were so explicit in their usage that if you wanted to hold this office, you had to be this age. Black people counted for 3/5. They used
but that's
fractions.
Holding federal office. That's all. Well, but that's holding federal office. That's not religion.
But they didn't even say. There is the oath of office for the president.
Right.
Is transcribed word for word in the Constitution. Right. But they don't say you have to do it on a Bible, and they don't mention.
That's right.
They don't mention God.
But the state laws in all 13 states required every oath to be done on a Bible and mention God.
But only 3 of them actually were still there. That litmus test was only there when the Bill of Rights came into effect. Only 3 states still had those laws, and the founders had been trying to phase that out.
Let's take the religion side for a minute, because when you take the First Amendment, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, one of the cases we did at the U.S. Supreme Court was Rabbi Leslie Gutterman was asked in Providence, Rhode Island, to give a prayer at a graduation, and he wasn't allowed to.
This is my favorite part of the interview, because Jon Stewart brings up the fact that David Barton doesn't believe in the separation of church and state, which David Barton skillfully weaves, actually answering that question. And then Jon Stewart brings up the fact that the Constitution barely mentions religion, and David Barton says it mentions it 7 times, when most historians say it mentions it 3 times, but he never explains why he believes it. He mentions it 7 times. And Jon Stewart also brings up the fact that the Constitution requires that there not be a religious test for public office. David Barton counters by saying all 13 states required that religious test. Jon Stewart then says at the time that the Constitution was enacted and the Bill of Rights came into being, only 3 states still actively required a religious test. There is no answer given. David Barton skillfully evades that and says, let's talk about the First Amendment and how the First Amendment is applied in today's setting and where he believes the Supreme Court oversteps in applying First Amendment separation of church and state issues in the First Amendment Establishment Clause. David Barton never answers the historical charge leveled at him that he is twisting history, that he is saying that 13 states required religious tests when in fact only 3 states still were requiring religious tests at the time that the First Amendment came into being. He never answers. And as we watch David Barton throughout his career, throughout his time that he is influencing the current Speaker of the House and many other politicians, David Barton never answers these historical accusations that are leveled at him. He simply evades answering them. He simply continues to teach that the separation of church and state should not exist, that the Supreme Court is overstepping on the establishment clause when it comes to religion in the public sphere. And he never answers when he is called into question, when he is called out for twisting history. Jon Stewart did a great job calling him out here. The only unfortunate fact is that David Barton so overloads his conversations with information and is so skillful at evading actually answering these charges leveled at him that Jon Stewart never comes back and says, hey, only 3 states required religious tests, why did you say all 13 did? Jon Stewart never follows up with that. And throughout my life, I have listened to hours and hours of David Barton history lectures because I grew up with David Barton teaching, watching them for my history classes, seeing him in person once or twice a year. I'm very, very familiar with David Barton. He so loads his teaching with quotes, with misstatements, with inaccuracies, that it's almost impossible to keep track of all of them, but he sounds so educated. He sounds so polished. He knows how to buffer his premise that separation of church and state is not supposed to exist so well that the unassuming person listening to him would believe him, especially if it already goes into your own bias that America is a Christian country and secularism is harming America. If you already believe that and you hear David Barton speaking, you're going to swallow him hook, line, and sinker. That when historians go through and start pointing out all of his historical inaccuracies, he so skillfully evades answering, and he brings up other points that the historians pointing out the historical inaccuracies are drowned out in the silver rhetoric that David Barton offers on a literal silver platter to anyone who wants to believe him. And I think this Jon Stewart interview so perfectly showcases that. It is not a mistake that we have people elected to public office who do not believe in the separation of church and state.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
David Barton was an influential Republican operative for years. For 8 years, he served as the vice president of the Texas Republican Party. He was an advisor to the George W. Bush campaign. He also served as an advisor to Ted Cruz and eventually to the Donald Trump campaign. Also, this mask is painful, so we are taking it off. So happy Halloween, folks. I really can't think of any scarier than if we got rid of the separation of church and state. And already, it is heavily being eroded.
I am a Bible-believing Christian. Someone asked me today in the media, they said, it's curious, people are curious, what does Mike Johnson think about any issue under the sun? I said, well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview. That's what I believe. And so
that's your personal worldview.
My personal worldview.
If you like this video, I hope you subscribe because I put a lot of creative energy into this and I'm not sure it's going to be monetized because I did use so much of that Jon Stewart interview. So if it's not monetized, that's unfortunate. If it is monetized, yay. Maybe I'll let y'all know in the comments once I find out. A great way to support this channel is by subscribing to my Substack, as well as leaving a comment on these videos. You can do either of those things. That would be super helpful. And I want to give a shout out to Fundies Fridays, which is the poster behind me, because Fundy Fridays totally helped inspire this video with their own Halloween special. And I was thinking, what do I want to make a Halloween special about? And the number one thing that came to mind and was a recurring theme as I thought about the scariest moments in American politics is David Barton. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and here's to taking down the scariest man in America.
reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.